Hey guys, in today's tutorial I'm going to show you how I painted this tuxedo cat, and for the black fur I painted it mostly with burnt sienna and ultramarine blue mixed together, which is my favorite mix to create blacks. And so I'm going to show you how I did that. Just remember, if you would like to watch this tutorial in real time, which is over an hour long with a lot more detailed explanation, join my Patreon. And otherwise, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I upload new videos every week. To get started on this painting, I did the transfer, and now I'm going to put on the masking, and I'm using a rigger brush. And the reason why I like a rigger is because the long bristles hold more masking in it. I have to reload my brush less often. And for this particular cat, I put some phthalo blue in my masking so that I could see what I was doing and so that my students could see what I was doing. So you can see I'm painting the whiskers, and as you can see, some of the whiskers are the full length whisker, and some of them I just paint half of the whisker, the outer part, or sometimes the part that's closest to the face, and that just adds variety and makes it look more natural. I also added masking to the eyes, to the ears, and a few of the little flecks of white fur that are in the cat's face, like on his nose and in his cheeks. And I would also recommend that you don't overdo the masking. Usually I don't paint with masking in the fur itself, and I don't use too much of it because it does start to look stilted really fast. And once I remove this masking, I will have to refine it by scrubbing the ends of the whiskers that are attached to the cat's face and making sure that nothing looks stilted and pasted on. So almost every time you use masking, you're going to have to do a little bit of retouching after you remove the masking, so just keep that in mind. Also, if you join my Patreon, it's only $5 a month, and you get access to about 20 full-length tutorials, and you also will be able to see more of my palette. In this particular tutorial, I had to leave it out because it was too overwhelming to have that in this video. But if you join my Patreon, you'll see this video with me painting on my palette too, and how I use my palette and mixed those ultramarine blues and burnt siennas. For the background, I did a wet and wet wash, and I used Winsor Green Gold, Cobalt Blue, and Permanent Green Light. And the secret is to get the whole paper wet where you want to put this first wash, but don't get it puddling. And I usually scrub my brush around on the paper just to even out the water across the whole paper so I don't have puddles here and there. And now, while my paper is wet, I'm taking advantage of it and doing that first layer of the fur to make it really soft. And again, this black I have here was created by mixing ultramarine blue and burnt sienna, and maybe a little Winsor violet. Winsor violet added to the mix also makes for a very beautiful mix, and I do that often as well. And where you see the paint darker, that means I had less water mixed into my paint. And where the paint is lighter, that means I applied paint that had more water added to it. And also I'll keep a piece of paper towel to blot my brush off to get extra water out, because the name of the game with watercolor is controlling how much water is in your brush and how much water is on your paper. So I always want to make sure I have just the right amount. And I'm doing a little bit of an underlayer of ultramarine blue too there, and then painting in his ears. And usually you want to paint the ears onto a dry to semi-dry paper because you don't want them to get fuzzy looking. And I'm using my rigger there to create the finer little textures in the face. This cat had a lot of flecks in his fur, so I wanted to create that look by using a rigger and a lot of little brush strokes. And that's ultramarine blue where you see the blue on his face. And then as it dries, I can put in heavier layers of the mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna to create a darker area. You can also see in that the cat's right or left eye, I painted over the corner by mistake, and later I will erase some of it by scrubbing. And right here, what I'm going to do is start working on the furs along the back of the cat. And this is a boundary where there's really dark fur hitting up against that really light background. So I want to make sure that the furs look realistic and detailed. And the best way to do that in this area, I thought, was to do a dry brush technique. And that's where you have just a little bit of water in your brush and a lot of paint, and the paper is semi-dry to completely dry. And I paint with the side of my brush, and then where there's a hard line appearing at the bottom of that mark, I went in with clear water to soften that, as you can see. And I used the side of my size 8 silver black velvet round to create that texture. Now I'm going to do the underpainting for the body of the cat using ultramarine blue, Winsor violet, and burnt sienna all mixed together. And I kind of color block them in to create interest and movement in the fur. Then I take my wisp brush and use that to create a more wispy looking fur texture so that when the viewer's eye looks at it, it reads as fur. Add a little bit of that fur texture on top of the drying layers of the face. And then I clean that brush out and wring it out and lift out some lighter areas of fur so that it looks like the light is hitting that fur. Then I am going to work on the eyes, and the first color of paint that I put in is Winsor green gold. And then when the whole eye is moist, I add cobalt blue and permanent green light to the top of the eye to create roundness and depth. Now I'm going to work on that eyeliner. I like to always attach the eyeliner to the pupils. And as you'll see, as I work in this painting, I will go back over that eyeliner and the pupils several times. I'll let them dry and then paint over them again. Let them dry, paint them over again, so that with several layers, I create a darker black eyeliner, which is very important. I want that to be the darkest black in this painting so that the viewer's eye knows to kind of be magnetized to that area. And then I'm using an acrylic brush to clean up the edges of that eye and also soften the edges. And if you're using Arches Cold Press, you can use a stiff scrubber to create the same effect. And I'm doing the same exact thing. I try to paint the two eyes together so that they both have a similar color pattern. And then I'm just refining some of those furs above the eye, getting them nice and dark. And again, the eyeliner was completely mixed from ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. It makes a very nice dark black. And I'm using a little bit of dry brush technique to put in some fur textures in the face. And the nose area is very dark black too, so I make sure that I get that area really black. See, there I go again over the eyeliner to get it really dark, and then darkening the edge right directly under his upper lips to get that contrast nice and dark versus white. And I want to darken the background a little bit, so I'm going to do that in this next little section of painting. And first I moisten the area with clear water. I want to create a boundary between the white chest and the darker background. So I'm going to put in a subtle little bit of color down there in the bottom right corner of the painting so that the cat's chest is a little bit differentiated from the background. And there I put in a mix of Winsor green gold, cobalt blue, and there goes in some permanent green light. And then I'm going in with my wisp brush after everything is completely dry, going over that first layer I did of the fur with some dry brush technique and just a little bit of fairly wet paint. So I add quite a bit of water to my paint and then just put a few fur textures here and there. I don't paint every single fur. I just paint a few of the fur textures to suggest fur texture with that wisp brush to make it look realistic. And there I'm doing the whisker dots, and usually what I do is I paint them on dry paper and then kind of mush on them with my finger to kind of mush them down and make them have more interesting softer edges. Then I use some lighter black and some ultramarine blue to develop the lighter areas of the face. And again, I'm scrubbing along the eyeliner on the inside of the eye just a little bit to soften that edge. And I almost always like to do that because it just makes the eyes look soft and realistic and kind of dreamy, to have a little bit softer edges around the periphery of the inside of the eye there. And I'm also scrubbing along some of the boundaries in the face, going in with some wisp brush fur texture again, not painting every fur, but just suggesting it's some of the fur texture so it reads as fur. It's the same thing with bricks. You don't paint every single brick, you just paint a few of the bricks. You don't want to overwhelm the viewer's brain. The viewer's brain wants something to figure out. Give them something to figure out. Don't tell them every single thing in the painting, just suggest. There, I took off my masking, and then what I'm doing now is refining the ends of the whiskers that meet the face, and I almost always have to do that with a stiff scrubber on my Arches 140 pound. Again, that's why it's so important to work with good watercolor paper. It's the #1 thing that you need to have right to get your watercolor painting look right is good paper. And I talked about that in my latest videos, top 20 tips for watercolor beginners. And my #1 requirement was to have good paper. And this is exactly why, because of all the scrubbing I do to soften edges, it's such an important part of my process that you have to have good paper to be able to do that. And you have to have good paper to be able to do multiple layers like this. Now I'm putting in more of the ear liner, and ear liner is almost as important as that eyeliner. You want to get those edges dark, and usually cats have ear liner if you look at it. And just remember, don't keep the edges all one width. Some of the ear liner is thin and some of it's thicker, so just keep that in mind. Now at this point I cheated and used lamp black. The customer came back and said they want the fur even darker, and so I decided to use lamp black to just add another layer of complexity because I hadn't used lamp black at this point. So it was okay to go in, and I'm using a bit of dry brush also to create some texture, and going in and just darkening that fur in the body area. And that first layer that I put down will shine through that black and add interest, so it won't be a flat black. Usually when you're painting really large areas of black, you do not want to use just lamp black. However, I did do that in my last tutorial of the Tuxedo Cat. So if you didn't see that and you want to see how I painted with lamp black for most of the fur, you can watch that video about painting a Tuxedo Cat with lamp black. But in this particular cat, I was allowing a lot of the underlayer to show through by using more water in my lamp black and also a drier brush technique, so it allowed that lower layer to kind of shine through, and it really did add a lot of dimension and interest to do it that way. Now I'm just going back over the face and getting the darks dark, because now the body is darker, so now I need to get the face darker in certain areas so that everything is balanced out. I didn't want the face to look washed out, so with the body darker, now the face needs to be darker. So I'm just going back in here and there and adding even more darks to that face. And I signed with a mix of ultramarine blue and burnt sienna. One of my Patreon students gave me a cool little tip today. She said she tried ironing her painting to get all these little ripples out, and it worked. I've never tried it, but apparently you can iron watercolor paper. There we go. All right, you guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. Be sure to subscribe. I upload new videos every week. And come and check out my Patreon. If you do join Patreon, join it in the first 2 weeks of the month, because Patreon will charge you when you join and then again on the first of the month thereafter. All right, you guys, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you guys next week. Bye, you guys.